Hello, I'm Baffy. I've been around for years, and basically I'm just a bit of a hoarder, so I collected stuff over my years, from the time I've been here, and it just means I can tell a few stories now. This one is going to be about the Sussex Lancers. This is their emblem, the Sussex Lancers Motorsports Club. Who were they? They were a subculture within our subculture. They were a Brighton-based leather, denim, rubber uniform club for gay men that ran from 1980 to 2001. Obviously pre-internet, making connections with like-minded men who wanted to dress up and play with each other was much harder. So you did it under the guise of a sports club. But it was much more about the dressing up and the playing than the motorbikes, believe me. The origins are quite interesting. They start at a gentleman's clothing establishment, 31 Bond Street, which I think is now, this is not a butcher's, but it used to be Filkin Casuals. I have to say that quite carefully. This is from The Story of Underwear by Sean Cole. It will become clear, it will make sense in the end. Filkin Casuals of Brighton was named after Phil and Ken, known to their clients as Aunt Rose and Aunt Esme. They were the most notorious outfitters outside of London in the 50s and 60s. The flamboyant cut and colour of their clothing often cast suspicion on the sexuality of the men wearing them. Now, this is Sean Connery, but apart from that, this is a similar shop in London. I'm not sure there are any Filkin Casual adverts out there, but this is a very similar shop, so you can get the kind of clothing that they used to make. Back to the Lancers. Ken Burton, Aunt Esme, he was part of a gay leather bikers club called the Wealden Warriors, and in 1980 he started up a new group called the Sussex Lancers. Given Ken's penchant for amusing names, I think the fact that Ken lived in Lancing is why they were called the Sussex Lancers, to be honest. There is no other logic to why they were called that, really. They were a European-wide brotherhood, so the ECMC in the corner stands for the European Confederation of Motorcycle Clubs. And you can see that they held events around the UK, but also around Europe. The Lancers are also part of the Federation of UK Clubs. Indeed, yes. Yeah, they were a cheeky bunch. The Lancers were actually one of the largest clubs in the UK. They had about 150 members at their peak. In 1980, when they started, they were meeting at the 42 Club, which was 42 on King's Road, which I think is a rock shop now. But that was one of the famous, well, I think the famous gay club in Brighton in the 50s. In '84, they moved to 74 St James's Street. Originally it was called Whispers, but within a year they renamed it Villagers. And just after that, they renamed the basement bar the Cockpit. If you go up St James's Street, it's still a drinking establishment. The corner on the right is called Gin Gin. It's something else now, but it's where you get to Upper and Lower Rock Gardens, which at the time was known as Vaseline Alley. They occasionally met at the Brighton Basement, which was not an official venue. This was actually the home of Paul and Roy, who were Lancers. And they would have, well, there was lots of leather, lots of fun. So there was lots of dressing up, and they became known as balls. So they had balls in the basement, is how they were advertised. They also met for a while, interesting, at the Marlborough. In '92, the Marlborough was actually a men's bar. It was a sea of leather jackets and moustaches. Wonderful. After that, they moved on to the Schwartz Bar at the New Europe Hotel. The New Europe Hotel is now Legends. The Schwartz Bar was the basement bar, so it's now the dance floor of Legends. It's where they used to entertain each other, shall we say. Once a year, the Lancers would host an event for a weekend in which people were, other clubs were welcomed to come and have some fun. So there would be games. I think that's a three-legged race. I'm not sure what game the Duchess is playing here. It would also include a bike run out through the Sussex countryside, and it became known as Brighton Bound. It's a bit flamboyant, isn't it? They also ran, these were very popular, they were known as rip and strip events. I'll leave leave that to your imagination. They were political. They started attending London Pride in 1987. This is two Lancers at an anti-Section 28 demo in 1988 with their pretend family relationships. They tied each other together. That ended up in Gay Pied, the French gay magazine. They were also involved with the early days of Pride. So this is Brighton Pride in '92. No idea who that young man on the motorbike is. Warning, there's a drawing of a penis coming up. There we go. They were a raunchy bunch, but they were community-minded, a bit like kind of sexy Freemasons in leather, if you must. In the late 80s, they got involved in fundraising for the Sussex AIDS helpline. Obviously, AIDS had quite an impact on a group like the Lancers. The first death from AIDS of anybody in Brighton was 1984, so a lot of people died at the end of the 80s, start of the 90s, including two of my friends, Rob Gilson and Max McCann. They were both in the Lancers. Max was one of the, was the president. They were very ridiculous men. They had a really good sense of humour, as you can see. That's how I remember them. In 1990, the Lancers began supporting Open Door, fundraising for Open Door. Open Door was a support service for people with HIV and AIDS, and they were based at the home of the Anglican priest, Father Marcus Riggs. This was quite a groundbreaking bridging role between the community and the church, especially the HIV community, who were kind of stigmatised and seen as pariahs. That's because Father Marcus and Keith, his boyfriend Keith, were both Lancers. Which explains, because Father Marcus was based at St Peter's Church, why St Peter's Church is quite so prominent in the AIDS campaign. Thank you. Sorry, it's a bit emotional seeing Rob and Max there. So Marcus was also the chaplain at Ward 6 at Hove General Hospital, which was one of the AIDS wards. And in 1989, the Lancers raised £1,000 towards some new equipment, which in 1989, £1,000 was quite a lot. As if Section 28 and AIDS weren't enough, then came Operation Spanner. You may not have heard of it. It was the name given to a police operation in Manchester in 1987, where 16 men were charged for having S&M sex, despite the whole thing being completely consensual. They were convicted in 1990. Here you can see some of them got 4.5 years for completely consensual behaviour. They appealed twice, both appeals failed. Despite the fact that there were two similar cases involving heterosexuals at the time who had the cases dismissed against them. This was obviously going to impact on the Lancers, and they were out at an ECMC bike run in Belgium in 1993, where they got word from Jock, who used to be a Lancer, who then moved to London, that he'd been visited by the police. So when most of the UK groups came back from that trip, they started burning their records because it was too dangerous to have. So that's kind of where the records for the Lancers stopped, really, because it became too dangerous. Also, with the development of a commercial leather scene, fetish scene, the impact of AIDS, and people just getting a bit older, I guess, the scene changed and Lancers folded in 2001. They donated 2 boxes of Lancer history to Brighton Our Story, which include meetings of minutes and 4 albums of photographs, which defy explanation, really. In 2013, Our Story returned the boxes to them, and I've just found out while trying to source material for this that those boxes have been burned. So out of those 4 albums, we have 2 photographs that are left that were scanned for the Brighton Our Story newsletter. I'm sorry to end on a downer, but it's a cautionary tale for all of us about how fragile our history is, really.